Okay, then it's fine? Oh, yes, it's a yes from the audience. Great. So we made it. Fourth time or third time, it works. So I can't hear myself, which is great, but too bad for you because it means I will be uncontrollable. I see familiar faces, so that means I will need to behave, and other people, partners of the UNIF, to be a very warm welcome. Shorter, which I would like to thank very speak like that. Yeah, that's better. So that's fine. Fine. I have a special coach here in terms of tech, so I thank you, sir. I'd like to thank very warmly my great team at the BMW Foundation and our fantastic partners at the UNFCCC, Gaurav, Lindy. It's so much fun to work with you, and it's the third time we're hosting this, and it's just fantastic. As you see, there's a lot of competition between great events, and so we are extremely grateful to our great speakers for having made it more than on time, but beforehand. There is something that we call every year the COP casualties, and some of you might be familiar with what we call COP casualties. Those are delegates who are meant to be on a panel but are caught by surprise in negotiations that drag on. So today we have 1.5, possibly 2 COP casualties, Amadou Hott and Nigar. Nigar might join a bit later, but Amadou is trapped in an African Union discussion. I'm not betraying any secret here, and it's unlikely that he will join, which is sad because he's running, as you know, for the presidency of the African Development Bank, but then we have him on the schedule for a next event. So it's my great pleasure. My coaches are really great in the audience. I love them. As you know, I'll keep it short. So it's no surprise that geopolitics has become a driver of the climate agenda, not the, but a definite driver. And that as far as the energy transition is concerned, it is actually shaping geopolitics as much as geopolitics is shaping the energy transition. So we will do within the next 60 minutes or so an exploration of the different pathways to strengthen our collective resilience in the face of accelerating geopolitical shifts. I mean, as they say, we are in the age of the geopolitical recession or the geopolitical winter, and we'll see how we can warm up together. So I have a great panel with me today. To my left, Maria Fernanda Espinosa. Everyone knows her at COP, and outside of COP served twice as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Ecuador, Minister of Culture, Minister of Defense. Actually, the 3 lenses through which any sound man should look at climate. So we will, I guess, have a look at those 3 dimensions. And you, amongst many engagements, sit on the advisory board of COP29. So actually, I stole you from all those negotiations. I'm a bit ashamed, or I'm not. Next to me, Tony Agota, who is actually one of the men behind the success of the Green Deal, was instrumental in making it a success in the team of Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, and now serves as EU Ambassador at Large and EU Climate Representative. Is that fine? Can I make? Okay, fine. Then I passed the test. And last but certainly not least, Erik Solheim, who served as Minister of Climate and Development of the Kingdom of Norway, and as you know, was Executive Director of the UN Environmental Programme. I mean, Erik, you're from Norway, but as we joked, you also are somehow Chinese because you spend half of your time in China and India. So I look forward to those perspectives from the new center of the world from you. So I'd like to start turning to you, Tony. We had a discussion yesterday and earlier today. We won't just look at one country in particular when it comes to geopolitics, but the issue is there's the feeling that the energy transition is too much to ask from citizens. And many are saying, well, the price is very high, And after all, I don't really understand the political gains. So how do you really craft a narrative that speaks to everyone?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And that is a very, very pertinent and also very difficult question. And we've been struggling with it because it starts with the science that impels us. If you look at the science, the story that comes out of there is that we're already decades too late to make the change. And every year that we procrastinate, means we drive up the price for action and for solutions. So the costs of inactions are huge, but you almost never hear about it. What you hear is about, the costs of transition. With or without a European Green Deal, there is a transition. There's a paradigm shift in technology and demographics and economics, geopolitics, climate and environment crisis. Everything is changing at a scale as never before for everyone. So we're trying to navigate that change and saying, well, listen, these costs of transition are investments, they give returns. And so next to the story of how bad it is, there has to be a story of this is what it means for you. We don't do this for the planet. The planet has been here for 4 billion years without people. It will be fine if it gets rid of us. We do it for humanity. It's a human-centered transition. And so that message of clean air, fresh water, food without or less pesticides, greener cities, more food for everyone, new jobs and a clean economy. It is possible, but we have to overturn a 150-year-old fossil-fueled, spent, erratic, burnt-out economy. And that's what we're doing right now.
Thank you. Maria, you've done so much over the past years, if not decades, to try to build a consensus between different fragments of society that were not really get on well together. And we are, as I said, amidst a growing geopolitical recession. And at the same time, climate is no longer a priority. It is now an emergency, as we are seeing. So I mentioned earlier that you were a part of this COP29 advisory board. How have you tackled the misalignment or disalignment or disagreement between many countries? And something important is how we fast-track climate action and ambitions nationally and globally. So how do you build consensus when some are tempted to slow down, if not retreat?
Well, thank you, Grégoire. I don't know if this is working. Is it? Okay.
It's magic because we don't hear anything here.
Yes, I don't know if it's good or bad, but but thank you to BMW, to the convention, to the host country, Azerbaijan, to NGIC, well, to everybody that has made possible for us to sit here this afternoon and discuss something that is so critical, is the impact of geopolitics in climate decision-making. And I think that this metaphor of geopolitical recession, I would say what we are experiencing is the building of a multipolar world. Multipolarity is more volatile, more unpredictable. It embraces complexity. Therefore, to reach a global agreement, an universal deal on a fair, just, and speedy transition is not a minor issue. It is, I would say, the big challenge of the 21st century. And how you do that in a world where diplomacy has been replaced by conflict and war. I'm, of course, a big advocate for good diplomacy, for dialogue, and for multilateral solutions. And what we see here, not only here, but in 20 years of perhaps COP's experience, and Eric and I were remembering the good old times, what you see is an energy saying, you know, the private sector can do it. These are the good practices. The communities are adapting better. You know, resilience is higher. The cost of renewable energies are going down. So we have the science, we have the knowledge, we have the technologies. What is going wrong? Because we are meeting for the 29th time and emissions continue to grow. So what is wrong? And in my opinion, after all these years, I can say that our capacity to transform and change our lifestyles is at stake. Our capacities to change the pathways of development of our countries is at stake. And also, it's an issue not only of political will and leadership, it's also an issue of trust. Because if we established a 100 billion target, and we said 100 billion starting in 2020, and it took us a few years, to really reach that very minor amount of money, here we are at the COP29, called the Enabling COP, because we have the huge task ahead of us of agreeing on a new number and on agreeing on where is the money going to come from. And this is not an issue of arithmetics and of money. It is an issue of power. It is an issue of lifestyles. That is why this is so difficult. But I am an optimist, understanding what is at stake, understanding the frictions and the dynamics of the international geopolitics. I can say that this is doable, because the climate crisis that we are experiencing, and I live in Spain, I've seen firsthand what happened in Valencia last week, understanding everything that is happening in the world of today. I would say, first of all, we need to trust the multilateral system. We need to give it the right space and the right opportunity. And number two, this is a human-made crisis. As you said, the planet can live very well without us, but we cannot live without the planet. We are negotiating here our rights to use equally, fairly, and sustainably the atmospheric space. That's why this is so difficult, but it is not undoable. I think it's doable. The climate crisis is human-made. The solutions have to be human-made, and there is a combination of factors that need to come to play. And I really commend the initiatives coming from the private sector, from cities and local governments, all the efforts that we see around, science and scientists coming, strong and hard to say we are going above the limits of the use of the atmospheric space, etc. But I think this global, universal, new deal, new pact, new quantum has to happen, and it has to happen here and now.
We've seen for the past good decade that local governments, regional organizations were instrumental in strengthening local resilience, and it's not just everything at national level. A point that Maria touched upon is, of course, the crucial role of technology. So I'd like to turn to you, Eric, because when we talk about climate action and obviously energy transition, everyone, absolutely everyone, is dependent on green tech. And as green tech is concerned, if I look at the past decade, 2/3 of green tech technology was developed in China, 60% of clean tech in the past 3 years, and 2/3 of global solar and wind energy came into the grid in China alone. So I think that sets the kind of a standard. So is non-cooperation an option based on that?
Anyone who wants to do the green transformation without China, of course, can do it. Just it will be much slower, much more expensive, and take a lot longer time. China, not the US, China is now the one indispensable nation for the green transformation. Well, I look European, but let me take on me to explain what's happening in China, but as well as in India. I mean, you gave all the figures. China last year invested $900 billion in the green transformation of renewables alone. How much is that? Well, just to give one comparison, it's 20 times the entire GDP of Nepal, one of China's neighboring countries. 20 times everything produced in Nepal was the investment in the green technologies of China. China, as you said, produced 2/3 of all new green energy in the world last year. The rest of the world, America, Europe, us, India, everyone else, 1/3. So China is the absolute indisputable leader. which we all need, if we try to put tariffs on everything from China, well, it will be just much more costly to do the green transformation. But it's not just China. Move on to India. Prime Minister Modi just launched a scheme for 10 million solar homes in India. Well, that's large. That's not a small scheme. The state of Gujarat, which agreed is the lead state in India, the state of Gujarat alone has the target of 100 gigawatt of new renewables by 2030. How much is that? Well, it would make Gujarat, if it was a separate country, the 8th biggest producer of renewable energy in the world, far behind China, rest of India and the United States, but very close to Germany or Japan and the medium-sized producers of just that one Indian state. And they're well on the way to do it. I'm very confident they will do it. And no one in Europe is really aware of this enormous transformation. Why is President Xi, Prime Minister Modi doing this? Because that's what is important to us. I think there are 3 reasons. First, this makes economic sense in the very direct sense. They produce jobs. Prime Minister Modi is launching green missions for India by the day. I was with him 3 weeks ago in the Indian city of Ahmedabad. He spoke for 1 hour. Not once did he mention the problems of climate change. Not once. The entire 1-hour speech was about the enormous opportunities for India, going green, bringing everyone out of poverty, using renewables as the new way of powering the Indian industrial revolution and providing jobs for the Indians. A complete positive message of what India could achieve 1 hour. Nothing about all the negatives. So this is number 1. And of course, China had no stake in reality in the old car economy. Nothing which could compete with BMW or Toyota. Now it's dominant in the new electric car industry. So this is make complete economic sense for China and India. Number 2, both China and India have no oil. That means as soon as you can tap into the sun and the wind, the sun is Chinese, the wind is Indian, you use domestic resources which don't cost. You don't send money to my nation, Norway, or to Russia, or to Saudi Arabia. You just save money domestically if you turn into renewables. And President Xi and Prime Minister Modi is very well aware of that. And lastly, of course, this also makes sense from a geopolitical level. China and India are now leading in what is the most dynamic industries in the world, which is setting the pathway for the future. And of course, it makes them front and center in the 21st century, while of course China and India was in the backseat of basically everything. They were recipients of American and European actions in the 19th and 20th century. Now they're actors in their own sense. So China and India is doing that, not for Trump, not for Europe, not for America, because it's completely meaningful for themselves. And of course, they will continue whatever happens in the United States.
Thank you, Eric. I mean, if I translate it correctly, China's overcapacity is good news for Europe. It's an opportunity.
I mean, absolutely.
Switching,
of course, I mean, look.
gently looking at Tony.
Look.
It will fall on you as well.
What is this? This is my Apple phone. Why do I, as a European, have an American phone? Because Apple has overcapacity in phones. Apple is producing many more phones than the American market can absorb. If Apple was just making phones for the American market, well, it would have been a medium-sized company, not the biggest company in the world. And when China is not dominant in solar, wind, electric batteries, and electric cars, we should all applaud. And we should try to tap into and benefit from this Chinese overcapacity rather than criticizing China. I've never, ever heard anyone criticizing Apple because they have overcapacity.
I'll get to you, Tony, because you will have no choice. You'll have to answer. But Maria, is there this feeling that this question on, how geopolitically dependent you are on a specific big power is a very European thing, European question? Because it's often the case that, sitting with counterparts of yours in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, or the Middle East, they say, it's the way you view it, but we tend to see it in a more slightly open way, and we go where opportunities lie.
Well, I would say, number one, I think the issue of living a multipolar world is a reality. And the dynamics of power are changing, that's for sure. We have witnessed, the rise on what I would call energy nationalism in some spaces, in protectionism. If we connect the issue of investing in a just and fair transition together with the impact of that in supply chains, for example, I think the picture is broader. It's not only, who is able to produce more renewable energy, is the issue of access and the issue of universality. Countries like my own, for example, today, as we sit here, we're having energy cuts of 8 hours a day in Ecuador today because of drought. 8 hours a day. And we are a sun-rich, because we are in the equator, sun-rich country, a wind-rich country. The issue of access to technology is a big thing for small countries. The issue of cost, intellectual property, and access is absolutely critical. It's not only the net increase of renewable energy, it's the issue of access and distribution. And I think these are, the keys, and these are, deals and conversations that need to happen at the regional level, at the bilateral level, but above all, I think also at the global level. I mean, we need, an honest conversation regarding the issue of access. In countries, again, sorry that I'm using the Ecuadorian case once again, but, half of our income comes from oil exports. We are an oil exporting country. So what are the alternatives? How is that the transition pathway look like? And it is obvious that we need more cooperation, more solidarity, and to look at, again, at the world as a global family. This might seem naive of my part, but I think it's necessary. When we speak about transitioning to net zero, decarbonizing our societies and economies, I think we're also talking about cooperation and solidarity, especially with the countries that suffer the most from climate shocks. I include my own, but if not, we all know the small island development states, the landlocked countries, the energy poor countries, and the billions of people that are still in the dark today. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. And for that, money helps. A proper NCQG is going to help, believe me.
Thank you, Maria. Tony?
There's no specific question. It's just
no,
free riding. Okay, well, let me start. So first of all, I have a Finnish phone, fully Finnish, because it's secure. I'm afraid your Apple might not be so. No, but on a serious note, competition is great. And the EU always wanted to compete. And before 2020, when we were conceiving the Green Deal, we could calculate behind the comma where we could get every raw material, every product to make this transition work. Because, as Thomas Frieden once said, the world was flat. Then we had COVID. COVID suddenly was, of course, wreaked havoc around the world for health, but it also wrecked a lot of supply chains, and it made us realize that our dependency on the supply chains for medicines was enormous. India, for instance, or others. And you had a lot of natural, not good, but natural responses by countries to say us first before the rest. That was the first big shock. The second big shock was the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, which was another epiphany. Call us naive or not, but we suddenly realized that being so dependent upon Russian fossil fuels to fuel our economy, with the premise and the rationality that we always believed in, this ideal world that if we have a mutual interdependence, there will be no war. Well, in 1907 or 1908, there was Norman Angell who wrote about the great illusion, and then he said, you can't have war, it just doesn't make economic sense, and then we had World War I. Well, it's happening again because we're humans, unfortunately, in that sense. But coming back to competition, we now know that the supply chains and independence is important to have a certain independence, because otherwise you'll be enslaved. Second of all, when we go to China or other countries, we want to compete with China. We don't just raise up walls. We are very surgical in how we do this. We're very transparent and inclusive. If we say competition, yes. Unfair competition, no. We will not accept it. We have a WTO. We believe in the rule of law, the international rule of law. We believe in the multilateral order. And let's be very honest about it. It is ripping at its seams. And you will always find the EU on the side of the multilateral order. If there's an issue, that's where we go to. We talk about it. We do our best to craft our policies in line with the WTO. We could talk about it later, why that does or doesn't work in the eyes of some, but that's at least where we come from. The intent is good, but let's realize that in the ideal world, the world would be flat. Unfortunately, the world has been unflattened, and we have to cater for it to make sure that the survival not only of our economy, but also of our way of life. So for us, enshrined in the most beautiful article of the EU treaties, Article 2. If you take anything away today, read Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union. When it comes to rule of law, human rights, and democracy, this is what we live for, and this is what we want to fight for. That is part of it. You cannot just look through a straw on the economy. It's the whole thing.
I'd like to comment on that, but I know Eric has a question or comment.
The European Union has launched two kind of trade barriers with exactly the opposite reasons. One, I think, very well funded, and the other not so much. I mean, the CBAM, the logic behind that, I think is well established. That is to say, we want to decarbonize the European, say, steel and cement industry, and we cannot do that if competitors can bring into the European market cement and steel with much lower standards for the environment, because that will be unfair competition. I agree to this logic. I think it's well established, and I think Europe should stick to that, even if it may be uncomfortable for some nations. But the tariff on electric cars is exactly the opposite. That is to say that Chinese electric cars are so advanced, so high-tech, so low in price that we cannot compete. And that, of course, is exactly the opposite. China is, in the first place, inferior to the European standards, and now they're superior to the European standards, and Europe cannot, in all decency, argue both. So what is the solution? Look, if you are President Macron, you are more interested in jobs in France than in Fujian. If you are Chancellor Scholz, you are more interested in jobs in Germany than in Guangdong. That's fair and square. But what Europe needs to do is to go into negotiations with China to find ways where there are a lot more Chinese investment in Europe so that China can now share its technology with us. That was what China benefited from in the past. They had numerous American and European investment that they benefited from. Let me just give you one example. Quite recently, I was with CATL. CATL is now #1 energy battery producer in the world, far above anyone else. They have no competitors in Europe. They have some other competitors in China and in Korea. But the interesting was the conversation with CATL, because they said BMW was absolutely essential to us in the early days. Without BMW as a demanding customer, as a market, as a partner, we could never have developed CATL. Now CATL is far above BMW or any other place in Europe when it comes to batteries. Maybe time has come for us to invite CATL to invest a lot more in Europe so we can benefit from their superior technology as they in the past benefited from our superior technology.
Can I briefly? No. But so I appreciate on CBAM exactly, and it's not a trade measure; it is an environmental measure, just like deforestation is. When it comes to the tariffs, again, I repeat, it's about whether this competition is fair or not. We're open for fair competition. That's why these tariffs are not on every brand. That's why these tariffs are not the same height for every company. They're very, very surgical and specific, and we are in constant conversation with the Chinese how to navigate this as best we can according to the rule book of the WTO. But at the same time, when you say the Chinese have been able to deliver an overcapacity and an overquality, you have to ask yourself, so how was that possible? Where did that money come from? Well, it comes from a system that is very different to us. It comes from a system that would be forbidden in the EU, because that would be state subsidizing, and there's no way you can compete with that, and we're not going to go that way. So that is the reason we have to say, well, we'll compete, but on a fair basis.
Wow. Is it working? It's hard to tell. Yeah. When we say the word subsidies, I mean, the climate community becomes very nervous, because we know how much money goes into fossil fuel subsidies every year. The magic number of $7 trillion per year, and it happens everywhere, and this is something that we really need to honor. The COP28 that I had also the privilege to serve in its advisory committee when we came up with this phrase, transitioning away from fossil fuels. I think we have to be, very serious about how to go about it and how to put the words in motion. Deeds and not words. That's what, citizens are saying out there. But I wanted to bring also an element that I think it's important when we discuss transition, when we discuss fairness, equity, access, and to understand that transition is an investment, and everything that you have heard here. It's the issue of critical minerals in geopolitics. I think this is a discussion that we really need to address seriously. The geopolitics of critical minerals. If we only see that by 2030, the demand on critical minerals is going to be multiplied by 3 and multiplied by 4 by 2050, I think we need to look at the geographies where critical minerals are placed. And I think that we really have to learn the lessons from the oil and gas era and not repeat the same mistakes, because critical minerals and extraction of critical minerals can be also environmentally damaging in terms of water, air, and other aspects. I won't do the environmental assessment of extraction of critical minerals, but I think we should learn from the past, not make the same mistakes, look at the geopolitics of the countries that are rich in critical minerals, and ensure that issues of environmental care, of precautionary principles, of people's rights, of redistribution, of proper contracts and access are taken into consideration. I think this is going to very much mark the quality of the transition. So we would be again in an era regretting the era of critical minerals, and regretting, having based renewable energies into damaging other parts of our shared planet Earth. I just wanted to bring that to the conversation.
Eric?
This is an incredibly important issue. And of course, China is not totally dominant in basically all those value chains. But no nation in the world I'm aware of want to pick a choice between China and Europe, or between China and the United States. Yesterday I had a meeting with the Indonesian delegation here. Indonesia will be the 4th biggest economy in the world by 2050. It's a rapidly developing nation, and they are now very self-confident. And they were very proud, because they said, oh, we in Indonesia have no enemies, only friends. There may be some people are not really aware of us, but we have no enemies anywhere. And the president first went to Beijing, the new President Prabowo of Indonesia, and met with President Xi. Now he's in Washington meeting the American leadership. Indonesia, of course, want to balance. We should do our utmost to help nations make this balance, because every small nation in the world wants to be having investment from China and the West, getting technology from China and the West, sending their students to Harvard, but to Oxford, but also to Tsinghua and Peking universities. They want to be friendly to to both China and the West, let us allow them to do that, and the world will be a much better place. And the value chain is one such area. I mean, Indonesia have a lot of these critical minerals. Now, I think most of them are developed in cooperation with China. But from an Indonesian perspective, because it gives meaning to balance this and develop it both with China as well as with other companies.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I commend, because that would be my vision, and I'm sure the EU's vision. But that's the norm. The reality, I think, is just it's going to be complicated, and we're, I think, in the midst of a huge paradigm shift geopolitically. The reason Indonesia is hedging or balancing this, like Brazil, is because they don't know where the chips are going to fall, and so I think we have to do everything to make sure that in this evolution of the global order, we don't lose the main principles that are laid down in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if I can put it like that, because those should bind us all. And yes, there are new powers there that legitimately have a claim to be at that global table, and we have to deal with that. So I'd like to go back to the world is flat and we're more in partnerships, because the other one is detrimental. It will not help the transition. It will not help fight climate change. And as I said yesterday, we're all in the same boat. And I think the one reason COPs work is when everyone comes here, despite the tough negotiation, okay, history will bear out if I'm right. But so far, we've always realized we're in the same boat, and you cannot say to the other side, only your part is sinking, and you got to plug the holes and row harder while we lay back. We're all in it together. And I think the great example COP can set in the world is if we get out of it, it shows global diplomacy can work, and it matters, because, boy, do we need more global diplomacy.
It's music to your ear, Maria, no?
Yes, I wanted to applaud because I think that there are issues that, regardless of they say the bottom-up approach to climate, and I'm a strong believer, the bottom-up, what communities are doing, what women, we are doing in terms of resilience and adaptation. I lived 5 years in the Amazon working with indigenous peoples. That has been the university of my life. Believe me, I've seen it. It works. Mayors and governors and regions and the European Union coming together. All of this is necessary, but nothing can replace a universal deal to deal with our, common good. The atmosphere happens to be a common good, and what we are negotiating is our rights to use the atmospheric space in a fair, equal, and smart manner. And that we can say this very easily, but I know it's a tough call. It's a tough call, and the only alternative is climate diplomacy, more and more good climate diplomacy. And I'm also in a small group trying to rethink and renew and rejuvenate the way COPs are organized. I think we can be more efficient. I think we can do better. I think that COPs can reduce the carbon footprint because it's very high, this COPs. We can do it better, but these spaces are irreplaceable. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here with all of you in the room.
On the critical materials, am I allowed?
Oh, yes, please.
So, fully agree with you. The dilemma often in policy is, it's like diplomacy, it's the choice between bad, worse, or tragic. It's not like you have one choice and everything works. So there are trade-offs. It's like freedom and equality. We all think that these principles are great, but in absolute they're contradictory. We need critical raw materials, and the first thing I want to say about it, the fact that there's a scramble, a move towards them, is actually a good signal. Because why do we move towards them? Because we believe in the transition all around the world. So that's number one. Number two, fully agree, we should learn from our lessons and not just ravage the world. We'll have to do it sustainably, but we still will need them. Doing it in an entirely damage-free way, I think, is impossible. But we have to have that condition and with precautionary principle as such, because we need to go there. And then thirdly, the economic model, I hope, for instance, if you go into Africa, where there are huge potentials, not only for renewals, but also for raw materials, to help them develop is in our interest. So we would have to find an economic model that we just don't go in there and scoop up all their materials, but we help them make sure that they can not only extract it, but then can add value to it in products, which will increase their development enormously and hopefully leapfrog everything we've done wrong in the past.
Eric, I saw you nod.
There is a book about these value chains for solar panels and electric cars, etc., written by a journalist in Financial Times. It's called Volt Rush. If you haven't read it, rush to buy it. It is brilliant. There are two main conclusions in the book. Number one, China is dominating all these value chains because they were far ahead of anyone else. And secondly, the value chains are rapidly improving, even if, of course, there are still numerous environment and social issues related to them. But if you allow me to turn the topic a little bit back to where Tony started, because I think that's very, very important. We need to make the energy transition a people's movement. We cannot speak a language which we constantly do, which no one understands. I mean, we go around speaking about COP29. How many people in the world know COP29? Could it be 100,000? Well, if it's 100,000, it means there are 8,000 million who don't understand it. UNFCCC, no one knows it outside this room. Still we go around talking that language. It must stop. And I will give you one example of how we can get it completely wrong. When I was in the Norwegian government, we wanted to promote wind energy in Norway. And we did it top down and fully focused on finances and technology. We were discussing what is the right financing model to make sure that we had wind energy all over Norway. Should we do it with the Swedes? How should we incentivize that? What we never ever around the table in the government discussed was, well, do people really want this? Are they with us? Very soon, every place people put up their hand and said, no. This may be good for the world, may be good for Europe, may be good for Norway, but it's not good for me. It's not good for me. It's not good for my family. We get no jobs. We get no revenues from this. And if we want to make this a people sentiment, we must make revenues available for the local people. There must be a lot more of a dialogue with them. Let me give you also one example. I was very recently at the biggest solar plant in the world. It's in Xinjiang in China. It's 4 gigawatt. It's absolutely impressive. This is how we replace fossil fuels. But it's not small and cozy. No one will want to have that in their neighborhood. Because it's so enormous, you see solar panels to the horizon. It's like an ocean of solar panels. So we need to make this a people's-centered movement. We need to make a fair transition. And there must be a lot more of dialogue and a lot more of revenue sharing with the people at the spot of the solar farms, the wind farms, and the hydro plants. If not, there will be the same all over the world as the resistance in Norway.
No, Tony, you will ping pong, but talking of people, who has a question so we can prepare? Okay, at least one. Is there a microphone somewhere? Okay, meanwhile, Tony, the floor is yours.
Okay, no, great. First of all, the European Union is not some strange monster far in outer space. It's a union of 450 consumers, more important, 450 million citizens. So that's number one. Number two, the bottom up and talking to I agree with you, but that example, as you said, does not necessarily the example that was so successful in the other countries you've been speaking about. Number two. Number three, when it comes to bottom up, I want to mention youth and children. You mentioned it already briefly, Maria. The Friday for Future marches, so annoying to boomers like myself or my age. Those were instrumental for our European Green Deal. Those young people, because it's their futures, because Eric and Maria, even Gregoire, I know you're young, but we'll be fine. We'll be fine. But the youth, 2030, 2050, that's not far away. That's tomorrow for them. That's their future. So we should especially listen to them. And I think their message is sometimes a lot more forward than the vested interests who say, we've earned a lot of money in one way. Let's continue to do that. And on children, the last thing, I want to give a big shout out to Save the Children, who's also around here. They have a startling fact, namely that 88% of climate-induced disease is born by children from 0 to 5. The generation we are taught to nurture and protect and to save first, 88% of those diseases are for children from 0 to 5. We have a global responsibility for their future, not just for us.
Maria, you want to bounce back, or?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing from the audience a little bit, but fully endorse the idea of a people-centered transition. I think it's important. Just look at any election process around the world. If climate is part of the conversation of politicians today, it doesn't bring votes, but it should. It really should. So also we need to do some pedagogy and to some heart-touching on the voters, because we see that the message is not reaching the big majorities.
Please, sir, in the first row.
Thank you. Great panel. My name is Markus. I'm a professor of international relations at a technical university in Germany. Mr. Solheim, your input was very refreshing. You talked a lot about India, you talked a lot about China, but what about the relationship between the two of them? Will we have a competition? Do you anticipate that there will be a new great game which those two countries will dominate in the green transition? Thank you.
I'll leave this one. The good news is that the relationship is now drastically improving. President Xi and Prime Minister Modi met 2 weeks ago, and they agreed to try to calm down the border tension up in the Himalayas. So I anticipate that it will improve. Even the relations have basically been frozen between China and India for the last 5 years. I think we will now see many more tourists coming, much more exchange of students, easy visa applications, journalists traveling. So we'll see a drastic improvement of the relationship between China and India. But it's not like China and India will start loving each other. The Chinese and the Indian culture is very different. In my view, the Chinese and Indian culture is more different from each other than either of them are from the European Christian culture. We see them from Europe as quite similar. They're very different. As example, China is the least religious place on planet Earth. Nothing to do with the Communist Party. Has been for 2,500 years. Much less interest in religion. India is the most religious place on planet Earth. Religion is front and center in the life of nearly all Indians. So they will not start loving each other. But what neither of them will do will be to be the puppet of someone else. You have a lot of people in Washington believing that, India will be our guy in Asia. They will play our game with China. Prime Minister Modi has a 3-pronged foreign policy. India first, India second, India third. And in that, they are ready to work with everyone. And I think we'll see an improvement of the Chinese-Indian relationship. But it will be a marriage of convenience, not a marriage of love.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thank you for this amazing panel. I'm Mariana, I'm from Portugal, and I have an NGO that is focused on climate law, and we've been doing an investigation on the recent lithium mining projects that we have in Portugal. And I heard what Dr. Maria said about not repeating the same mistakes that we did with the fossil fuels on the past. And I've been seeing a lot of mistakes, especially legal mistakes, that we've been doing with this mining process. We've been seeing violation of public access to information, to be involved in the democratic process. We have right now in Portugal prosecutors saying there's a lot of illegal projects, there's a lot of corruption. Our government fell last year because of scandal corruption based on hydrogen and lithium. So there's a lot of issues going on, but the projects keep going. All the population is against, and they don't want money. Like, they don't want money at all. They just want us to live them with their life. So my question is, how can we address this issue and not repeat the same mistakes? And the second question is, should we be quantifying how much lithium, for example, do we need for an energy transition? Because we don't have like a number, but we have finite resources. So do we need a number? Should we quantify this? Thank you.
And can you just remind us which country you come from? Portugal. Okay.
Sorry.
On the first part of the question, do we have any? I think the issue of that was corruption, correct?
Corruption. Yeah.
Maria.
But perhaps I can say something.
I think generally speaking, you said.
Well, I think your point is very important. Regardless of the very specific cases, I think we need a code of conduct. We need shared rules. We need universal standards. We need to make operational the precautionary principle. We need to understand exactly what are the technologies available to minimize the environmental and social impacts of, because extraction is extraction. You know, extractive economies are extractive economies. But, you know, we didn't do it well. I'm speaking again from first-hand experience in Ecuador, what, you know, oil companies did to the environment and the health of the people on the ground. The Texaco Chevron case, I think, is well known. And we know, you know, the cost of that. We cannot repeat that in terms of environmental standards, in terms of human health standards, but also in terms of what we learn in modalities of contracts, for example. So I would say that there are ongoing processes out there that we should pay attention to. Under the umbrella of the Human Rights Council, there is a new treaty that is being negotiated. It's called the Treaty on Transnational Corporations and Human Rights. As you know, the right to a safe, healthy environment is now part of the commitments of member states. I think these issues have to come into play. So highest environmental and social standards, and that includes, of course, a prior consultation with people. It's really not easy. Just let's think about countries in the global majority, in the part of the global majority that have so many pressures, you know, for their development needs. You know, it's a tough choice, but you can do it, but do it well and do it better than what we did with oil and gas in the global south. And of course, I'm not teaching lessons, but I work for government for 14 years in different capacities. Sometimes they're very, very tough choices, you know, especially when there is no international solidarity, when there is no proper tech transfer, when there is no proper resources. And here in this COP, we have the opportunity to turn the tide. And if we have an NCQG, we hopefully, the first day, an agreement on Article 6 on carbon markets, which was good news, I think. But this is the space, this is the place, but we have to look at the overall multilateral space as well. You know, I'm looking at what happened in Cali the previous week and what is going to happen very soon with the Desertification Convention.
But I think an important point that the lady stressed that you referred to, Maria, is how we build trust also among citizens. And so I thank you for that question, because I think too often we forget about it because we think, you know, the right pathway is there and we just don't want to involve citizens in the discussion. I know we have other questions, but there's one thing we haven't so much. Is that fine? I really love my coach there. I really should work with them on the longer term. It's how can Europe really honestly get inspiration from what works, not just in Washington, but possibly also in Beijing? Because I somehow want to make that Eric and Tony leave as good friends, so I want to make sure they find some common agreement.
Well, that can happen if Norway joins the EU, but no, but seriously.
I have a piece of paper and we have a desk
we
over
get
there,
Article
so
49.
it's never too late.
No, but serious, because we've been speaking about EVs, I don't want anyone to leave without the impression that the EU is doing its utmost to navigate its relationship with China. And I can say that China is doing its utmost to navigate its relationship with the EU. We have an EU-China high-level dialogue between the European Commission and China. We have all kinds of technical workshops. We try to go into the provinces, try to establish where can we help. We can also support. So, for instance, China is very interested in our emissions trading system. If the Chinese were, and they've started with their trading system, if they progress, and they will progress, it will be the biggest trading system in the world. And I can tell you, once they do that, it will also be the biggest decarbonization machine in the world. And so we're talking to them, and they're happy to talk to us. So yes, and I think this goes both ways, and it should go both ways. My only point was, we have different systems, we have sometimes different interests, and I think as long as countries and we try to navigate these as best we can. And in a good relationship, you also are able to openly speak about these differences without it blowing up.
Well, I know there are many questions, and I need to apologize to the audience, but I have very, very good friends at UNFCCC, and I want them to remain friends, and they asked me to wrap up. So I need to follow the rules, and this will be a wrap-up. I think you stressed, Tony, how important the narrative was. I think we all agree that it's crucial to stress the urgency, but it's also important to keep not. And I don't know whether my coach's spirit is still up, but I still cannot handle that mic even after 60 minutes of panel. So I really want to thank very warmly our three panelists for that exploration in geopolitical risks and the energy transition. And I now need to set you free because I know you have very important meetings and negotiations going on. And I apologize to those who could not ask their questions, but there will be opportunities to engage in one-to-one. So thank you very much again, and thank you to the UNFCCC for hosting that discussion. Thank you.